Leaders are still the largest stumbling block for failure. I don't think that statistic has changed in 30 years, which is really ironic. We all acknowledge it and we all want to change it, but we don't. MIT put out a study. I think they researched 350 companies and they said that 95% of those companies have had.
Most companies don't fail at transformation because of technology. They fail because how they think. Today, I'm joined by Alex Adamopoulos, founder of Emergn, Forbes contributor and one of the most respected voices in product-led transformation. Alex reveals why projects still slow companies down and how to use AI to make your people smarter, not weaker.
We often ignore the early signs of fatigue or doubt, and the reality is often different. I think the word value has a lot of different meanings for organizations, and defining the right types of value or the right types of outcomes, not just output, is something that I also think is a challenge for companies.
What do you think is the hidden human risk that leaders are not paying enough attention to that might have an impact on the ability to adopt AI?
I think there's a huge resistance to change.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another new episode of the World Class Leader Show. And today, very excited to have with me Alex Adamopoulos. Alex is a seasoned executive with over 30 years of experience and is a proven leader in driving organizational transformation, which is a very important topic, through innovative business practices and technology adoption. In your career, Alex, you work with a high-growth startup, private equity, venture capital, and big enterprise. So plenty of experience. And before for EMC, ISC, which is an Accenture joint venture. But most important, in 2009, you have founded Emergn, a global digital business firm that successfully guided hundreds of Fortune and FTSE companies on their transformation journey. Most importantly, also, you are recognized as a thought leader. So you actually contribute to industry discourse through the writing for Forbes and your role as a board member, very important, of the Drucker Society, where you met most of the guests that we have also on the show, including the last guest, Amy Edmondson. You're also speaker, author, mentor, and clearly inspiring the new generation of business leaders. So, Alex, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Very grateful.
So, look, in today's episode, when Alex and I were discussing in terms of what to bring to the conversation, given your multitude of experience in the world of business, I think it's important and critical for the audience of CEOs and people listening to the show is, I would like to start with the idea of thinking how really leaders like CEOs can transform faster, and I would say also smarter, and you have a specific point of view, Alex, which is by being product led, and meaning, at least my understanding so far, but really that's why I'm interested to hear what does it mean? What's an interpretation that you give to product led? Is by learning differently, and also now, given the importance of these topics, by using AI to create, I would say, real human-centric value. So a lot of unpack in the first question, but first of all, why don't we start with one of the major conversation that happen in the business world? Why so many transformations still fail? We read a lot of researches in the past about the rate of failing, but can you tell me more about what's your feeling about failure of transformation, why failing, and what's also what you describe the transformation fatigue? So let's start with that.
Nothing I'm going to say will surprise you on why transformations fail. I'm going on nearly 35 years of being in this industry, IT services, management consulting, just being around a lot of the work that's happened in the last 3 decades. And going back 3 decades, the same rate of failure existed. From the moment people started measuring big change programs, I think the number's always been 70% of them fail. When you examine failure rate, Amy does a great job talking about the different kinds of failures, but not all of them are intelligent failure. Not all of them are, the right kind of failures. But the reason a lot of it is because of silos. I'm just going to pick one thing and say silos. So what we've seen, the historic problem we've all tried to solve is how do you get IT and business working together more effectively? How do you collapse those silos? And for the companies that have figured out how to do this, they've been able to scale and grow a lot faster than the companies that haven't. So when we talk about this whole idea of product-led, which could be interpreted as just another meaningless buzzword, and they wouldn't be wrong, it's just that you have to describe what you mean. It really is around getting the whole organization working together more effectively. It's recognizing that it's just not the IT side, it's not just at the business side, it's coming together. So even though statistics have been there for over 30 years, companies still continue to have challenges in solving this area about bringing more alignment. And I'm sure you and your audience have seen this repeatedly. I mean, just in the last 2 years, the budgets around digital have been democratized, meaning, the board level boards are now involved in how are we spending money on digital technology. I wouldn't say they don't care, but it wasn't really the board level conversation. Now they want to know, what's our competitive advantage in AI? What are our solutions going to be? How is that going to drive change? So there is a lot of pressure now on companies to figure this out. And we're seeing more and more companies now say, we are an IT company, right? We are a software company, no matter what we make. So how do we address it?
And we'll come back to this. You already touched on two critical elements. So the product-led model, and that will be very interesting now to expand a little bit more, and then the AI and the learning. But if we stick a second to the transformation, so unfortunately, you're right. I mean, it's also my experience, and still, the failure rate of transformation initiative is still the same. Sounds like there is no learning enough about it. So, and you have written a paper with Amy, right, in terms of the notion of failure. And we discussed in the episode really, 2 weeks ago with her. But what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding that leaders have about failure? You're introducing technology-driven, product-led organization, AI. So there is an element of experimentation, there is an element of testing, there is an element of learning. What do you think is, from your paper, what could be, the major takeaway for, the audience today to hear from you in terms of failure?
The hard thing for us to hear, and this would include me as someone who's in a leadership role, is that leaders are still the largest stumbling block for failure, meaning that these big change programs often don't get the support that they need inside the business at the level they need it repeatedly to keep the machine moving. So they're involved, they sign off, they stand aware, but most of the organizations we speak to throughout the year, and even some of the research we do, consistently points to leaders being disconnected around the big change programs, and not the teams not feeling like those who are writing the check are as informed or as supportive. And I don't think, again, this is what I'm saying earlier, right? I don't think that statistic has changed in 30 years, which is really ironic. We all acknowledge it and we all want to change it, but we don't. And I guess this is one of the main things. I guess the other one, though, there's one that's a close second, right? There's a lot of big programs out there that we all undertake, but we don't really know what we mean when we say deliver value. And I think the word value has a lot of different meanings for organizations, and defining the right types of value or the right types of outcomes, not just output, is something that I also think is a challenge for companies.
I agree, and that's also consistent with my experience. So transformation started without clarity in terms of what's the either economic value or, broadly speaking, the organizational value of transforming. Sometimes, especially I would say my experience from more technology-driven transformation, that value definition and creation is sometimes vague and is not enough or sufficient for people to understand. Because to me, it's all about the context. But people are not clear what's the context of transformation fail at some point because people, they disconnect without having a sense of purpose and value that you created. So I'm definitely with you on my experience. So let's talk a bit more about the product-led model. First of all, what does it really mean in very simplistic way, product-led for an organization?
Well, in the most simplest explanation, it's this idea of continuous delivery, or rather incremental delivery. So what we mean is, if you look at traditional ways that companies build products and services or create processes, whatever they're doing in order to operate a business or create value for their clients, most of us have grown up with projects. We have a project-driven mindset, project-driven approach. The challenge with projects, or the project mindset, is it's typically made up of time-bound initiatives. We have a Gantt chart, we have a project plan, we have a start and a stop. It's also something that we measure success by project completion. We tick the box, we've completed the phases, that's all fine. And again, going back to the leadership, the change is often dictated by, by the top executives or the top leaders, who sometimes end up being, as I said earlier, maybe disconnected or not as engaged. If you flip that and you say, okay, how does that then compare to something that's product led? Product led is incremental delivery. It's success measured by customer impact. It's not project completion, but actually, how is the customer experiencing the success of what you're doing? And it's also giving teams the ability to experiment. And again, going back to the types of failure, intelligent failure means that you've taken a calculated experiment. Maybe it worked out, maybe you had to pivot, but you're giving the teams the autonomy to do that. So product led is about bringing both the business and the IT organization together to look at how they collectively ideate, test, validate, build, and deliver a product. And when we say product, by the way, another word that sometimes gets misinterpreted, it can be a physical product or digital product. It can actually be a process. It doesn't always have to be something you and I play with or hold. Let's say you're an HR leader and you want to create a new onboarding program for your company. We would see that as a product through the lens of product management, because someone still had to have the idea. Someone still had to build a strategy around it. Someone still has to go out and validate the customer and market research, even if it's internal, on whether this is a good thing to go do. So all the principles that you would follow as a good product manager contribute to processes and any kind of physical or digital product as well. But that's the main difference. It's giving organizations a much wider view of what they're trying to deliver and build versus doing it in incremental projects.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, if we look through the lens of a CEO, I'm always curious because most of my work is inside of the mindset shift that is required to operate at a different level, Alex. So if we look through the lens of mindset and attitude, let's say, what do you think the CEO first should do or must do personally to lead the organization as a product-led organization? Because look, as much as we might agree on the critical value creation of a product-led solution organization, still at the end of the day, and we'll come back to the human side of that. But purely from a CEO standpoint, what's the mindset shift that need to happen at the leadership level to really drive the product-led work inside of the organization?
Well, if you remember, I'm going to say it's now maybe 25 years ago, a group of people got together and they published this thing called the Agile Manifesto. And when
Yes.
Agile was the big buzzword, right? And what's interesting about that manifesto is the way they described it sometimes is misunderstood. So they said something like individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Or customer collaboration over contract negotiation, right? So they use the word over, not in place of. I think it's important to emphasize when we talk about what a leader needs to be like in terms of their mindset to be more product-led, it's not foregoing the traditional things. It's doing the new things over the traditional things. So for example, it's not that you won't have temporary projects that you have to go still build or address in your business, but having continuous improvement mindset over traditional projects, having an outcome mindset over deliverables, because even though you deliver something, it doesn't mean that the outcome is still valuable or meets the customer goal. And I think that's something that sometimes get missed. It's having a mindset of curiosity and experimentation over compliance or over certainty, right? Isn't that the thing that we all see? We all see this whole struggle for certainty. We want to be certain that what we're doing is actually right. But the reality is, do any of us have any control really over certainty? We can control some of that, but we can't control all of that. So it's not, we act as if it's unusual when things fail, but the reality is we can't control it all. So you have to teach people who want to become more product-led that having a governance for experimentation mindset over a governance for certainty mindset is actually possible. and profitable and productive. And this is some of the things that we tell leaders all the time.
That's great. To me, without that shift, things will not really change. But you brought me really a question. Do you think now, 25 years later, the term agile has been properly understood in organizations?
We struggle with this a lot because of the business we're in. There's just too many terms, too many words. In the English language, we can't properly explain everything. Agility versus agile, lean versus Six Sigma, systems thinking versus design thinking, product management, project management, AI, automation. There's just too many words. I think there's companies that have been very successful in introducing and using agile principles, and of course, I would argue it's pretty standard today that most big organizations who did agile transformations have had some level of success. But is it really understood as a term? I would argue no, not yet.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, from my perspective, that might complicate that understanding of clarity of the terms is the word agility that's been then introduced inside of the mindset. That is more about mindset and leadership behaviors, like how people, they are really agile in their way of working. And that's, to me, is in the mix. Because, for example, I work for different organizations. They said we want to be more agile as an organization, and trying to steal that term and trying to apply it in different contexts without understanding how to make it real, for example, for people. I don't want to go there in the conversation and say that's, to me, is in the mix. That's not helping.
And part of the problem too is reorgs, right? I think you see it. I think, I mean, if some of the research we did recently, 30% of employees across almost 800 companies that we spoke to, we do a research study every year, have experienced 5 or more transformation programs in the last 5 years, right? So if you there's this whole idea of something we call time-bounded leaders. So new leader comes in, they're given a period of time to deliver change, right? 18 months goes by, 24 months, maybe they haven't gotten what they needed to. They leave or they're let go, new team comes in. And of course, the new team's obligation is to say that everything the old team did was terrible, so we have to redo it. And this cycle creates very unhappy people, bad morale, and no one becomes agile as a result of it.
And they actually build more what we said before, the fatigue, the transformation fatigue, and how people, they tend to respond to the next transformation, whatever happens, and what is the background. You have, by the way, what do you think is the critical point of a successful transformation? So before getting into other elements like AI, the human-centric value, I'm curious, from your experience, you have a lot of great, I'm sure, case study of the work that you have done with clients. But if you have to pick one, what do you think has been the critical factor, if we haven't, maybe unless we already covered, otherwise, what is an additional critical factor for the success transformation beyond what we already shared?
So we didn't cover it, and hands down, it's capability and skills of the team in the customer environments. In other words, if you look at the classic pyramid, people, process, and technology, most organizations excel at process and technology, not so much at people.
Yeah.
So I do think teaching people how to own their own transformation, teaching them how to own their own change, giving them the skills that they need to adapt new tech, but also think differently with the mindset we're describing. That is by far the single most successful criteria that we see. When the team actually applies new learning really well inside a program, all kinds of great things happen. Productivity rates go way up into double digits. Morale improves. You see outcomes coming out with real tangible value faster. There's all kinds of things. So I don't think there's enough investment in skills and capabilities of people to really know how to become more of a product-minded team. And that's the other thing to clarify. When we say product-led, we're not just talking about the role of the product manager in the business. We're talking about the C-suite, middle management, and also the people on teams thinking this way. It's not just the role of a product manager, but without the right skills, I don't see any of this really changing.
And you're referring specifically to technical skills, or it's a broader description of capabilities?
Yeah, I'm referring specifically to product management skills.
Okay. Okay.
And
Gotcha.
again, this is a term that sometimes is viewed as a low level term, but the idea, like I'll give you a great example. Andrew Ng, who is co-founder of Coursera, he's at Stanford, obviously known as one of the experts around AI. He said something really fascinating a couple months ago. AI is not about coding, it's about product management. And what he was saying is, if you read the article he was published in, the ability to frame a problem correctly, the ability to think through the impact of this product in terms of how it affects a customer or user, that kind of critical thinking that we talk about when we say product led, that informs what you do next and how you would tackle something like AI. And I think the more that organizations talk about product management as a game-changing mindset, the more they're going to be effective. Because ultimately, it means people have to have the skills.
Thank you for your clarification. It's so useful in reflection what you said. And I think it's a great segue for the next conversation I would like to have with you is Alex is about AI. So and the connection between AI and learning specifically. You argue that AI and learning are tied together. What does that mean for the organization?
Well, it means a couple things. There's this paradox of progress happening where you have, so much research that's being published on how AI can make you smarter or AI can make you dumber. It just depends on how you use it. So when you've got MIT saying, some users of AI tools reduce their brain activity or they weaken their ability to recall from a memory perspective, or I think the term is cognitive offloading, where you're offloading your brain because you're trusting an LLM
Yeah.
to kind of do all your homework.
Or you're delegating, like you're
Yeah,
delegating
you're
your
del
mental capacity.
yeah, it's almost like it erodes the mental muscles in a
Yes,
way, right?
yes, yes.
But the flip side is there's also research that shows if you use it with the mindset that it's a enhancer to the research or the work that you do or the learning you're trying to do, if you don't rely on it too much, you actually see massive improvement gains. You can actually excel quite quickly. There's also a lot of research that supports it. So I do think there's a combination of knowing like how much reliance you have on it, and also again, if we look at it as a company thing, right? We saw in our research this past year that over 70, I think it was about 77% of leaders say that AI drives growth in our company. Yet the same companies said that only 32% of the same companies said that they provide learning using AI tools or training. So there's still this disconnect around how AI and learning come together. I mean, obviously we talked about the mindset, and that's really important. But I do think there's some principles. I'm happy to share some of those if you think they're interesting that we share when we talk about the principles of AI enhanced learning.
Please do that.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing we tell people is principle number one is it has to augment, not replace your thinking. Like you
Okay.
have to make sure you're not allowing it to do all the thinking for you. We promote second principles. We promote active learning, so which means you have to be able to critique what the LLM might be giving you and reflect on it. Third thing is keep humans in the loop. In other words, make sure you're sharing that information with other people. That you don't neglect having a real human conversation that complements the learning that you're doing with AI. The fourth thing that we often talk about is the whole data thing, right? So you have to govern the data that you're looking at rigorously. You have to remember the value of AI learning really relies on the quality of the data. So we all talk about hallucinating LLMs, but you have to make sure that what you're getting is factual and useful. Measure learning depth, not speed. In other words, I didn't finish this report 100 times faster. I finished this report 100 times faster, but I've learned this much by doing that because I approached it correctly. Those are some of the main things that we like to talk about around AI and learning, because I think this is the whole mindset, right? around how you do that. And there are also different learning workflows that, if you want to talk about those, we can.
That's great. And I think it's great to start talking about principle. The question, and of course, is for, whenever there is a principle in my way of working, for example, needs to be a practice. So how can I bring that principle to life? What's the practical application of bringing this principle to life, which I'm sure is a part of the conversation that you're having with your client. And maybe that's as important as a follow-up question is, it might be that, but what comes to mind based on what you said is, where is the real value of AI not really showing up yet in the organization, and why? So if we look at these principles, say, if these are the principles for getting the most of AI, but also from a human perspective, capability, learning, improvement, all of that, is that is ready, is showing up in the system, or that is still missing? And that is still missing, why is that? So why you think it's still difficult to maybe apply this principle? And by the way, we are early days of AI, so that could be also understandable. But if you can tell me a little bit more about bringing the principle to life and what potentially is still missing in organizations to do that.
Well, MIT put out a study in the last quarter that said, I think they researched 350 companies, and they said that 95% of those companies have had zero return on investment on AI solutions. And so someone naturally asked, what about the other 5%? Yeah, what about them? So maybe they're making some money. I think there's a couple of things. You are so correct. We're so early. So when we say AI, what are we really saying? Like, if you're talking about, a machine learning application that does predictive maintenance analytics for a manufacturing machine, that's not what we're talking about, because those things are in use and they're helping. But if we're talking about how people use AI tools to advance their learning, to improve their jobs, to help accelerate development in their company, then you open up a huge conversation. And I think one of the reasons that it's still not as successful when it comes to that topic is, I think there are guardrails for intelligent use that aren't being applied. So for example, you have organizations that have all kinds of AI tools. Everyone's using something, at least 2 or 3 different things. People are buying large corporate licenses, for example, to some LLMs. But the data shows that on average, only 25% of an enterprise license to an LLM is currently being used, which means up to 75% of that investment could be lost because people aren't really using them correctly. And for those that are using them, they shouldn't be be uploading any confidential data, but they do. They should be held to some kind of a mandatory AI use disclosure. In other words, less than 20% of your content should be AI generated. You still have to do the heavy lifting on the 80%. There aren't citation checks. There aren't regular ethical and accuracy reviews. So not every company has a good, what I'd say, set of guardrails, or even like an AI policy that is being fully implemented. And what that means is, if everyone's kind of doing what they want to do, you have a fragmented approach to how you might be leveraging it as an organization. So I think we see that a lot, and we see the lack of clarity around AI use as a company, or how it relates to our data, as one of the reasons why organizations aren't maximizing their investment.
And when it comes to capabilities, though, Alex, is there any, we discussed about capability from a product management perspective, but when it comes to AI, a lot of organizations right now are thinking, how can I acquire those skills? And that's, again, it's an evolving conversation. But what's your view in terms of how to acquire the capability that you need, in order to get the most out of AI in organizations? Yeah, so what capabilities are needed? And then if you have a view, I think it's more about what capabilities versus where to acquire them.
In order to use AI correctly?
Most importantly, to get the return on investment of using AI in organization.
Well, one thing I would answer that with is, I'd say we need to close that 32% AI training gap that we see in the market. So it's fine to say, it's fine if 80% companies say, yeah, AI is We're doing a lot with AI, but if you don't have a continuous learning program for your organization on how to use certain AI tools as it relates to their job, then this is where I think you can't expect capabilities to improve. I would say that's one thing. I would say you have to have an individualized learning program. So, you have to be able to give people the learning that's specific to them. It can't just be generic. It doesn't apply the same way to everybody. We've all struggled with even figuring out how to prompt correctly. Prompting is a skill. There are people out there now teaching prompting, apparently. So this is something that we all have to get right. I'd go back and I'd say adopt a product leadership mindset, like look at the world through this product-led model, because if you do that, you're more apt to work on the right sets of capabilities for your teams to do that. Like one thing, so maybe a good example would be, we have a platform we call Praxis. So we have an AI-driven product management platform. We built our own LLM, but her name is Stella. And the reason we did this is because we said, look, we have all this proprietary data over nearly 2 decades on how to build product-led organizations. Why don't we stick it into an LLM, and why don't we build a prompt-driven platform experience where people could upload their existing product ideas or start new ones, but they could manage their product, in terms of validating it, doing the research, running experiments, this thing, right? And we have found that the way we did it is we built the platform, but then what we did with the LLM is we put in all our learning, all the things that we teach clients, we put it into the platform. So it provides just-in-time learning while you're doing your real job. So the idea is it's now like having a coach next to you. You can ask anything, you can say, how do I populate this tool? How do I do whatever? And I think the more that companies figure out how to bring learning into the actual workspace and not treat it as a separate activity, that will shorten the capability gap.
Let's bring the human factor now inside of this conversation, the human-centric value that I know you use that terms. What does really human-centric value from AI look like in practice? How can we say the human is at the center of the old AI revolution than implementation organizations?
Yeah, this is a deep topic. I'll summarize it. I think a couple things here. Peter Drucker wrote a lot about this idea of the knowledge worker. The way I would paraphrase this today, I would say that in most organizations, there are people that work with us and for us who know how everything works in the company. And if those people got sick tomorrow or they left, all that knowledge would walk out the door with them, right? We know that. So that knowledge does not sit in a database. And in the database is what the LLM and the AI tools talk to. They don't talk to the person walking out the door. So you won't get a complete picture of everything that you want to get when it relates to your business strictly through using some kind of tool. You'll get a lot and it will be very helpful. But when we think about human-centric, we believe you can't ignore the reality of the knowledge that lives inside people's minds and the experience that those people have over, years or decades of doing a job. And so how do you leverage that? And how do you not ignore that? By you keep investing in them. You keep treating them with dignity. You keep reminding them that they have value and purpose in the company, and that AI isn't about firing people, which is unfortunately we have a hyper-related conversation here. Some people have gone off the cliff around everyone's going to get fired to the other side of the spectrum. It's going to create all these great jobs. So I guess the truth is somewhere in the middle, but human-centric for us is realizing that in the words of Freeman Dyson, who replaced Einstein at Princeton, the digital mind will never replace the analog mind. I know some people would argue with that, but I firmly believe that's true. And the reason I believe it is because every day when I'm in my own company or have the privilege of being in customer organizations we serve, I see people who I know know how this business runs. And if those people weren't here, it would be problematic for that company. And that experience does not live inside an LLM.
As you say, we should really spend an entire conversation about that, because that's, to me, is the core of the conversation. But if we, without going so much, deep in the research and what the implication of what you just said, if we look again to, even from a pure leadership standpoint, what do you think is the hidden, let's call it hidden, human risk that leaders are not paying enough attention to for that? So what is the, in other words, what the blind spot the leader at the moment have for their own people, for what you said, that might have an impact on the ability to adopt AI?
I think there's a huge resistance to change. People talk about change and transformation, but we're all used to doing things a certain way. It seems easier to keep doing them rather than take the risk. I think the one I mentioned earlier about reorgs, I would also reword it as organizational friction. I would say that, confusion often comes up, teams and how people should work, and maybe curious if you agree, but I think there's also a huge hype versus reality challenge we have. There are all these promises of quick wins with AI, or we're going to make this transformation program the best ever, but we often ignore the early signs of, fatigue or doubt. Then the reality is often different. So all that goes back to that mindset, and that also the ability for leaders to, I think the one thing I would say that's really important, it's not just when I say leaders being involved, I don't mean showing up for meetings. I mean the kind of leadership where you anticipate the problems people are going to have or the challenges they're going to encounter. You have an anticipatory mindset where you're ahead of it. You know that one of the things that will happen if you're not is morale will diminish. So I think these are some of the hidden things that sometimes are very obvious and we don't see them.
I agree, and I would add, I think it's just a build of what you said. What's probably hidden is what is in people's mind, which is, people perception about AI, people perception about change, people perception about what's going on in an organization. And these perceptions are, unfortunately, are leading the agenda, because people that are led by their own perception, not necessarily by whatever reality we think is present. In other words, they create their own reality, and that reality could be very different or might not necessarily be an enabler for, what is needed in terms of doing that level of major shift when it comes to AI. Alex, I have a last question I think is important. If we bring all together, and if a CEO right now, is listening to this episode, watching on YouTube, and want to say tomorrow, it could be in 4 weeks' time, but whatever, to move forward, a product-led, but also AI-enabled organization. So what should they do? What would be, or maybe just one, or maybe 2 or 3 kind of bullet points, and what would you suggest them to do or to think differently about it?
First thing I'd say is call me. I'm happy to share. I believe in this whole idea of testing ideas in smaller, controlled ways. So don't go to this huge big bang approach and sign up some multi-month, multi-year contract with somebody. I say that as a service provider. I care about the outcomes that clients have. And the way that you build and shape a product-led organization is you start small. Pick a domain, pick a product, pick something you're working on that you can work with somebody like us or someone else who knows how to do this and test some of these principles and practices and show what great looks like. My experience has been when you go in and you do it in a controlled environment, you create what we call is a pull model, not a push model. A pull model is other people are now going to look in the organization and say, what did you do over there? I would like that, versus somebody pushing it onto the company when nobody wants it. So start small, find an area, do an experiment, run an engagement to show what's possible, and let that demonstrate what you should do next. I think this is the only way to do it successfully.
Totally sense. I do believe that is the right approach as well. It's also a good way to eat the elephant in a different way. So start small, start where it's possible, create value, and then take it from there. And of course, call you. Alex, so it's been an amazing conversation. So thank you so much for leading the way. I mean, this is such an incredible, important topic. And I'm glad that you cover, some of the areas, still talking about transformation. What is the issue about it? What is missing for people? You introduce the AI in a very simple and practical way. So I appreciate that, because sometimes conversation about AI, they can go so many different directions. So to me, you really simplified it and you gave a very clear message and practical application. And then, we talked about mindset, the capability, and the human-centric. So that is really valuable. Alex, thank you so much. I suppose people can find you clearly on LinkedIn. And can you maybe help people to understand how you spell your company name? So if they want to search for it, they're not going to wherever else they're going to go.
We pronounce it Emergn, and it's 6 letters, Emergn. And you can find us on emergn.com. And as you said, I'm on LinkedIn and happy to connect.
Fantastic. So Alex, thank you so much for being on the show. So I appreciate the time that you spent with me.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity.